The sky is very rich in phenomena, astronomical, meteorological, optical, and man-made phenomena. And therefore, only a very reliable sighting of an extremely exotic object ought to be considered in any way relevant to our problem of life. Therefore, only a very reliable sighting of an extremely exotic object ought to be considered in any way relevant to our problem of life elsewhere. And to the best of my knowledge, there are lots of exotic reports, but none of those exotic reports are reliable. For example, a 30-foot diameter metallic-shaped object lands in a suburban garden. A seamless door opens. There's a fascination with seamless doors in these stories. A metallic robot walks out, picks a flower, smells it, pets the cat, waves to a lady hiding behind her sliding glass door, turns on his heel, still smelling the flower, enters the UFO, the seamless door closes, and it takes off into space. Now that I would call an exotic story. No question about it. But when we look closely into that, turns out no one in all of Long Island, New York City, besides the one lady, noticed that this had happened. And the cat was unavailable for corroboratory evidence. And that's an example of an exotic story that isn't reliable. On the other hand, there are reliable stories. 200 people see something, but they're not exotic. It's a light in the sky. There are no cases where 200 people see something as exotic as what I just said. No cases where there's a piece of the spacecraft that someone captures and sneaks into a laboratory so we can investigate it. No one has ever managed to steal the captain's logbook of one of these supposed interstellar spacecraft. And until that sort of thing happens, it seems to me we must be very cautious and skeptical, because extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. It would save us a lot of trouble if those fellows would come here instead of us having to go out and find them. I'm not opposed to it. It's just that there isn't a smidgen of good evidence to support those ideas. I wish it were otherwise. And yet, we live in a universe which is astonishingly rich and full of objects. I keep stressing the number of stars. The number of stars that make up the Milky Way galaxy is about 250 billion. We don't have a picture of the Milky Way galaxy taken from outside because we don't know anybody who's been outside, or at least I don't. But here is a picture of the nearest galaxy, like our own. It's called M31. It's in the constellation Andromeda. If this were our galaxy, where would the sun be? Would it be here in the middle, where it's a central, or at least well lit? That's not where we'd be. We'd be out here in the galactic suburbs, in some rural place where there's almost no stars. Not a very important, significant place. And there are many galaxies. In fact, there's not just one here. There are 2 satellite galaxies of M31. But there are at least billions of other galaxies. Here is a photograph in which there are more galaxies beyond the Milky Way than there are stars within the Milky Way. This is a galaxy. That's a galaxy. That's one. That's one. That's one. That's one. That's one. There may be 100 billion other galaxies, more or less like our own. If that's the case, there are something like 10,000 billion stars in the accessible universe. Is it likely that our sun is the only one of those stars which has an inhabited planet? I think that that's unlikely. Now, the time we live in is a very epochal one. It is a time of great transitions. This is the first time in human history that we, or at least our instruments, are leaving the Earth, are going into space. And we're doing this with small, unmanned space vehicles, very largely. And here are some small, unmanned space vehicles coming down from the top of the Royal Institution. We have previously talked about the Viking lander on Mars, the Viking orbiter, typical interplanetary spacecraft of the last few years. Here is the Pioneer Venus entry probe and the Pioneer Venus orbiter, missions to be launched this year and next. Pioneer 10 and 11, which had that little plaque on it, right here, out beyond Jupiter on their way to Saturn. Here is Voyager. Here's Jupiter orbiter with probe. Here is a new generation of spacecraft, less noisy than we hear, being described and worked on. This is an ion drive to get to the outer solar system very fast. And this object here, looking like some great windmill in space, is a crude model of a kind of spacecraft which is under development, under study, which will be a half-mile or more across. A solar sailing ship which will use sunlight as sailing ships use wind to travel in the space between the stars. And for all I know, in the first few decades of the 21st century, there will be interplanetary regattas vesting with each other for the fastest time between here and Mars. Now, this epoch of space vehicle exploration and discovery reminds me very much of the epoch of sailing ship exploration and discovery, beginning in the late 15th century, a tradition which England played a noble role in. Here is a galleon of the sort that was used to explore what was then called the New World, and what we now call the Americas, but there are lots of truly new worlds awaiting exploration. The benefits of this sort of exploration, I think, are many. First off, there are practical advantages. We are stuck on the Earth. There are many sciences having to do with weather, climate, geology, and biology whose perspectives are profoundly limited by the fact that we only have had a single example to study. When we look at other planets, the powers of these formerly earthbound sciences are tremendously increased. I believe the entire cost of unmanned planetary exploration, which is very inexpensive compared, say, to defense budgets, is returned many times over by the ultimate practical advantages. In addition, we probe the deepest questions. We ask about the origins of worlds and life. We explore our surroundings in space. Every human civilization has asked questions about what is up there. Now, for the first time, we have a chance to find out. And finally, human beings are a curious, inquisitive, exploratory species. I think that has been the secret of our success as a species. We now have reached a point in human history when all the Earth is explored. There are no new places to explore on the Earth, with the possible exception of the ocean bottoms. At just this moment, these spacecraft permit us, in a halting, tentative, preliminary way, to leave the Earth and examine our surroundings in space, an enterprise which I believe is in the truest human tradition of exploration and discovery. We are, as I said, at an epochal moment. Our machines, and eventually ourselves, are going out into space. I believe that the history of our species will never again be the same. We have committed ourselves to space, and I do not think we are about to turn back. I believe the time will come when most human cultures will be engaged in an activity which we might describe as a dandelion going to seed. Artifacts from Earth are spinning out into the cosmos, and human beings will never again be restricted to this one planet.